Hello and welcome. My name is Merle McGee, and I am the president and CEO of Everyday Democracy. And I am delighted to welcome you all. I'm delighted to welcome our panelists who will introduce themselves shortly. To our event co sponsors, shout out to the Local Policy Lab and Generation Vote, and really welcome to all of you. We always like to begin our time together with an acknowledgement of the land in which we inhabit. And so I am sitting on Lenape land, also known as Brooklyn, New York. But I want to make sure that we all have an opportunity to take a moment to acknowledge that the land we inhabit are the ancestral homelands of First Nation peoples, and that we must pay respect to all Indigenous people, past, present, and future, and for their continued presence on their homeland and for their diaspora. And so we want to make sure that we are grounding ourselves in place and space. Everyday Democracy, as you may know, if you don't, I'm telling you now, is a nonprofit organization that for 30 years has supported communities across the US to use organizing, dialogue, and democratic decision making to advance a multiracial democracy. So, as you know, we are here in a conversation today about AI, misinformation, and the future of democracy. Yeah, we might need to take a deep breath about that. As an organization and as individuals, we are deeply interested in how artificial intelligence, or AI, and its frequent, unfortunately, companion misinformation are altering how we engage with our democratic ideals and institutions. I think it's important that we should all pause and notice the ways that real life relationships and interactions are being impacted by mis and disinformation, as we appear to be growing even more suspicious of government and our neighbors. Recent examples of mis and disinformation upended a local municipality's ability to protect new residents from racist and xenophobic attacks, as well as local municipalities are grappling with federal responses to natural disasters in the wake of rampant mis and disinformation being spread. For the purpose of this session, we will say that AI, artificial intelligence, what we mean is computers that do the common tasks that people perhaps would normally do. We take that from our friend who's with us today. We all are looking at these headlines around deep fakes and algorithmic biases and conspiracy theories. And we also know that AI can and is being used for things that are certainly more promising and productive. Today, we want to go deeper into both the immediate and long-term implications of AI, artificial intelligence, and its relation and connection to misinformation. So we aren't just reacting from a place of fear, but also one of knowledge and hopefully building solidarity. Today, we'll explore what do we need to be thinking about and what can AI offer ordinary people? How do we recognize and respond to harmful and undemocratic uses of misinformation through AI and other means? And what can we harness from AI for positive change? So first, we'll talk explicitly about our elections, and then we'll broaden the lens and look at other areas of our democracy, civil rights, economic opportunities, and certainly our democratic culture. And finally, we'll open things up for a Q&A with our esteemed panelists, which I'll introduce you to in a moment. But the first thing we want to make sure that we let you know are a few housekeeping items. Due to the nature of this discussion and quite honestly, our current political environment, we have disabled the chat to minimize the opportunity for racist, xenophobic, misogynistic, or other harmful messages or images to be shared. It's not you all, it's, other people, right? Um, However, we will be able to, you will be able to use the Q&A button on your screen to submit questions to the panelists. So that way you can be engaged in this process. You can also use the Q&A function to message our team if you're having trouble. And we're really excited to get through as many questions as we can and as time allows. If you require closed captioning, you can enable closed captioning by clicking the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. If you are struggling, we have a team here to help you figure out how to zoom room. And the discussion will be recorded, but for the privacy of attendees, non-speakers will not be visible on screen and your names and images will not be recorded in this video. So that's some of the housekeeping. That's some of the opening and grounding for where we are. I want to give a particular thank you to our team that's on here tonight, the staff at Everyday Democracy, but certainly the team that's working to make this event possible, including those who are on maternity leave. So shout out to Jesse, who helped to organize this event, but to our team, Shannon, Mary, and Kim, who are here to support you. So now let's turn to our panelists and welcome them. Chelsea Cartwright is the program manager for the Democracy Truth Project at the League of Women Voters. In this role, she works with League nationwide to develop and implement trainings and events that help members of the public counter dis and misinformation and advance a better public understanding of the democratic and electoral process. Welcome, Chelsea. We're delighted to have you here. Mutale Nkonde is the founding CEO of AI for the People, a public sector AI policy advisory firm seeking to protect the rights of Black people in an AI economy and reduce the expression of algorithmic bias. She is also pursuing a PhD in digital humanities at the University of Cambridge. And Mutale was a part of the team that introduced the Algorithmic and Deep Fakes Accountability Acts and the No Biometric Barriers to the U.S. To Housing Act to the U.S. House of Representatives. Welcome, Mutale. And certainly last but not least, Bruce Schneier is a public interest technologist, security expert, and lecturer in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. He is a fellow at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University, a board member of the Electronic Frontier Foundation and Access Now, and an advisory board member for the Electronic Privacy Information Center and verifiedvoting.org. Welcome, Bruce, and welcome really to all of our panelists. We're so excited to get started. So we're going to kind of break up this conversation in the following way. Part one, we're going to talk about elections and misinformation. So, misinformation as voter suppression. My first question is for Chelsea. And one of the biggest threats that AI and misinformation pose to our elections is voter suppression. And we define voter suppression as not only a way to sway the outcome of an election, but by actually denying people their right to participate in our democracy through a host of activities, such as voter purges, roster purges, voter ID laws, polling challenges, and honestly, disinformation designed to deflate or enrage people to action or to inaction. The League of Women Voters is actively fighting at least a half a dozen forms of voter suppression across the US currently. Can you explain how misinformation can lead to voter suppression, and how does it relate, compare, or contrast from other suppression tactics that we are more familiar with, like those in the aforementioned?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me this afternoon. I think it's important that we start with some grounding in the difference between misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation is defined as false or inaccurate information that's spread, sometimes inadvertently, and disinformation is false information, which is spread and with the intention to mislead and harm. That's malicious, and we've seen throughout this election cycle many different cases of mis and disinformation and how they impact voters, particularly back in January of this year, the New Hampshire primary, where a robocall was sent out to voters advising them not to participate in the primary. And knowing that that was AI generated is a form of disinformation, which is swaying folks to not participate fully in our democracy. And so mis and disinformation as a tactic of voter suppression causes confusion. It causes folks to not be as confident voters as they could be. And it manipulates people into acting or to not acting as part of our electoral process. So um, those different tactics of mis and disinformation divide communities and cause confusion. There are many different ways that we've seen more recently how election officials are being targeted with tools of voter suppression and fueled by mis and disinformation, most namely with the claim that non-citizens are voting. And so understanding that that's a false claim and understanding that um, the claim of non-citizens voting is unfounded, knowing that there are many steps and checks and balances for registered voters to adhere to be able to vote. And so as a fuel of mis and disinformation sparking the flames of voter suppression, um, it's also been it's also been seen that many poll workers are threatened and election officials are being threatened. So political violence is also a part of this conversation as well, because many election officials are facing threats and swatting and different tools that are putting their lives on the line. And that's all stirred by mis and disinformation and how that's come to be in terms of them trying to do their job. They are the trusted messengers in our democracy and in the process. So um, we should understand that they know best how elections are administered, and they have the most confidence in running election administration. So just in closing, voter suppression in many different ways have upend our democracy and uh, impact voters in a way that causes confusion and distrust. And those implications are ones of um, the ones that can be quite disastrous because they target specific communities and are really hoping for folks to be dissuaded in voting. And so knowing that this mis and disinformation causing this concern is quite unsettling, and knowing that the election officials are doing their best in terms of discounting the falsehoods of mis and disinformation. Secretaries of state, election administrators all across the country are doing their best to offer more confidence to people and provide folks with the facts when it comes to voting.
Mm. Thank you for that. And I definitely am hearing this business of mis and disinformation as a strategy to shake our confidence in institutions and the people that uphold them. Um, as as we turn our attention to AI and its relationship to mis and disinformation, I want to remind folks questions can be sent in their Q&A button. Um, and really, right, the question that we have is, how does AI supercharge misinformation and erode trust, participation, and other pillars of democracy? And I want to turn to you, Bruce, in particular. When it comes to our elections, voter suppression, election interference, misinformation is not new. We know that propaganda is a part of the process and strategy of persuading people to support a certain platform and set of ideals around how we want to do this democracy thing together. But now it's powered by AI, right? So maybe where you were kind of working with, you know, a limited reach in my childhood of commercials, let's say, to social media in my sort of adult years. But now AI is like really a thing that is helping to sort of drive this. And so we know the impacts of misinformation go well beyond just our elections, right? We talked about that a little bit at the beginning, and Chelsea mentioned that as well. What can you tell us about the ways AI and misinformation operate together? And what are the implications for this for our democracy, election, public discourse, democratic values, civic participation?
So let's talk a bit about the tech and then how it interacts. When I think about AI, I think about an increasing capability. It's a tool that makes us more powerful, individually, corporate, politically, and it changes things in one or more of four ways: speed, scale, scope, sophistication. Right? You can do things faster with AI. You can do things at a greater scale, at a greater scope. You can do things more sophisticated. So when we think about the tools of propaganda that have been with us, for a century, for a decade on the internet, we could think about more sophisticated fake articles, more personalized ads, disinformation going on a variety of platforms. So, that's stuff that is already happening. That is not an AI thing. And looking back the past decade, we think about the erosion of trust. People don't know who to trust because so much of information is false. That's very much a Russian playbook. Now, the ability for someone to say when they're caught on video, that wasn't real, that was an AI. Now, I actually think AI doesn't make much of a difference here. I mean, Trump was denying audios of him before AI was able to make them. You think about the two major horrific disinformation campaigns of today, right? The horrible racist, blood libel smear against Haitian immigrants, and the lies that FEMA is somehow harming citizens. Those have nothing to do with AI, right? Those are false beliefs being told to people and people believing them. So, I mean, I will say that AI doesn't make this much worse, not because it's not bad, because it's already so terrible that I don't see much further it can go. So, yes, we're going to find fake videos of politicians doing things. But a few years ago, there was a video of Nancy Pelosi just slowed down to make her look drunk. And that spread over conservative social media. Again, no AI required. So, what Joan Donovan here in Cambridge calls cheap fakes can be just as bad as deep fakes. Because the issue isn't, here's something you don't know what to believe. You and I, and probably many of us on this call, are savvy media consumers. We see a video, we see a fact, we look at where it came from, we look at its pedigree. And that is how we are able to judge real news from fake news. Those who can't, they can't anyway. The AI is not going to make a difference because they choose to believe it. So I do worry about AI. I worry about false persona. I work about persona bots. Latanya Sweeney here at HKS wrote about them. These are artificial personas that are, mostly normal, but occasionally say something political. That's going to be a new thing made by the scale and sophistication of AI. That could be a difference. But, we've already seen sock puppet accounts. I'm not sure how much of this actually makes a real difference in voters. I mean, we talked about that fake robocall in New Hampshire of Biden telling people not to vote. How many people didn't vote because of that? My guess is very few. And that was work done at the Berkman Center looking at 2016, looking at all that Russian misinformation, basically saying it didn't do much. The real issue was Fox News. And that's the problem. It's not AI, it's the polarization, it's the propaganda, it's the channels, it's that people aren't believing reality and instead believing that Haitians eat pets and FEMA's out to get you all. So I'm not optimistic, but it's not AI that doesn't make me optimistic.
Okay. And I'm really, Natalia, I'm really interested to hear what your thoughts are on this, and I'll throw you your question in a moment. But you can feel free, given your work and the particular focus. I think perhaps, Bruce, I might not feel as agnostic, because as we spoke in our pre-call, right, we know that AI is not it's not decontextualized, right? And so that becomes its own particular story to focus on. But let's talk about misinformation and marginalized communities, and really kind of lean into this question. Mutali, you've looked closely at how misinformation differently, right, targets communities of color and marginalized communities, and also how these groups resist and respond in um, in sometimes unique ways. I might modify this question by saying, when we say it targets communities either as subject or object, right? So I want to make that clear. Sometimes it's coming to you to make you feel a particular way, or sometimes it's about you. And so, and so I would, really, ask, in this moment, can you talk about how that misinformation targets communities of color and marginalized communities in particular, and also how these groups respond and resist in unique ways? What have you observed?
Yeah, great question. I just to go back to the last question, I'm actually not as agnostic as Bruce is in terms of the AI isn't the problem, even though I do agree with the sentiment. And I think that's because AI for the People is now 5 years old. So we are a baby nonprofit, but we are a real thing. We are no longer a project. We are here. And one of the things that we've done over the last 5 years is sat in various advisory roles or within trust and safety teams with like the big companies, the Metas, the YouTube's, TikTok. And in those seats, we've spoken specifically to trust and safety, who are the people within tech companies that make the policies to decide what goes on their platforms or not. And one of the things that we're finding, and I really did relate to Chelsea in this, is AI systems are often the first line of defense when any type of content comes onto a system. And when you are coming from a marginalized community, all our work sits in we really sit in the Black American experience. We already are a structural disadvantage with these systems. There's a very famous paper that came out of Carnegie Mellon in 2021 called Annotators with Attitude. And what it found was African American vernacular was being tagged as toxic speech when it was innocuous, whereas standard English was being tagged as being acceptable. So phrases like that's the bomb were being tagged as bomb threats. That's fire being tagged as arson threats. There were incidences where in the vernacular, there are ways that African American people that use AAVE may relate to each other in very loving ways. That was being tagged as toxic. So that's one example where if you have an AI system that is being trained on these norms, where just the simple way that Black people speak is being seen as toxic, but then the very innocuous ways and the very insidious ways that standard English can be used to undermine specifically Black women isn't being tagged, you're already setting up this power asymmetry where the technology itself is being programmed in such a way that expresses structural racism. So it's much more difficult for us at AI for the People to say that it's not agnostic when we know that there isn't a content god that sits at YouTube to say, you can see this, you cannot see this. We're using that. Now let's add generative. And just to add generative AI to the mix, what generative systems do are everything that AI systems do, which are sort and group. That's what those systems do. But they also use a computational technique called deep learning, where the system itself can start to make independent decisions, as it were. But those independent decisions have been learned from past decisions. So in this paper, Annotators with Attitude, basically what this group of computer scientists said, that we need linguists. I'm a sociologist. We need sociologists. We need activists. We need many more people to be in this tagging system as we're looking at things like speech. That's kind of number one. Number two, I think another thing that happens with mis and disinformation, specifically, I'm thinking about ways that honestly hostile lies have been spread about me and my work. They really play on this idea. They really play on the racism of the people that are receiving the message. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting was the suggestion that somebody who doesn't look like me is incompetent would have been just seen as, are you sure? Let me check, let me ask. But because it was coming from a seat of power and because it was coming from folks from a particularly powerful group, it was much more believed. Now think about, that's an offline truth that I'm giving. Now think about when that is coded into a data set, like I said, in terms of language. That false tagging of Black speech is based on a disrespect of Black people as a project. So obviously our speech is toxic. Then think about what it means in the context of elections, we may speak to each other in certain ways that gets downgraded in the algorithm, which is helpful to us because Black people are speaking to Black people, but the algorithm does not recognize it. Whereas, as we saw in the Russian example. So that's kind of one part of my answer. The other part of my answer, I would say, and this goes to Chelsea's point around election workers being tagged and this being kind of an offline online thing. And the robocall, you then have the robocall is one thing, but then you then have trolls who are powerful and own platforms. So the Kamala Harris the Kamala Harris deep fake, I don't even know what that was, deep fake, cheap fake, that then Elon Musk then shares becomes another set of problems where the video is false, but we have these powerful groups sharing it and they're sharing it to people in their echo chambers. So that's another very unique way in which specifically Black women, and there's a lot of data, get attacked. Now, the great thing about Black people on the internet is that we will clap back. And I use the term Black back because that really has been our resistance. Really, the way that I think we have counter messaged is that we have found new and interesting ways to speak to each other that often defies these gaps in understanding about the lived online and offline experiences of Black people. And even in this election, if we look at things like we find ways to organize offline and then we take it online. So Win by Black Women, for example, the day that Kamala Harris comes on, that was mediated. It was a Zoom call that was mediated by AI systems and other electronic systems, but it was Black people speaking to Black people who then created strategies, and then they use those strategies to build power. So there are very helpful ways. Zoom increased capacity. The whole platform now has larger capacity after that call. That we can use these systems in ways that are pro-democratic. But to Bruce's point, there has to be a deeper reading of what is a fact, what isn't a fact. And when anti-Black racism shows up, there has to be a deeper awareness within everybody that's encountering it to just ask those additional questions.
Mm, wow, that was a whole word there, Matali. And you said something that made me think about dating myself when we had deep concerns about Wikipedia. And right, one of those early moments, right, where you're crowdsourcing um, agreed upon, I'm going to say the F word, facts, right? And how, I mean, that seems so far away from where we are in this moment, and yet very relevant. Um, and of course, the ever present contextual reality of the racial hierarchy of our nation and the organizing of the social um, milieu around these ideas of belonging and othering, right? Belonging and othering. So I want to turn here, and we're going to be coming to one of our partners' questions in a moment. But before we do that, I want to hear, Chelsea, from you, thinking about strategies to identify and counter misinformation and its impact. I mean, I have to say, I'll just pause here and just say this piece around reinterpreting African American vernacular English as threatening um, speaks in that context, right? Of that you just shared speaks to the speed, the sophistication, and the scale and scope that Bruce was talking about. But to be clear, it is not unfamiliar. It's just the speed, the scope, the sophistication, and the scale of it. And so I'm curious from you, Chelsea, to hear what does the Democracy Truth Project, which we know you operate on behalf of the League of Women Voters, offer everyday people when it comes to fighting misinformation, the use perhaps of AI as a strategy or generative AI as a strategy, and those impacts.
Absolutely. So the four tenets of the Democracy Truth Project are to promote the right to vote, advocate on behalf of voters, listen and stay alert everywhere, and also uh, make sure that voting is accessible and free and accessible to all. So the Democracy Truth Project at its core is made up of uh, a cohort of states that receive grant funding from the league. But at its essence, the foundation of the project is trainings that inoculate, that teach people how to inoculate, that teach people how to debunk and pre-bunk. And it's a train the trainer series, which people can grasp and use in leagues across the country to be able to do the work and share that work in their communities. We know that the leagues know their communities better than than ever, and they're using this model, training model, to be able to share practices on how to combat mis and disinformation on a person to person level. And the theory of change that we're rooted in the Democracy Truth Project is one of trusted messengers, building up trusted messengers who can have conversations, often difficult conversations, with folks who might not agree with them, but they're rooted in truth. They're rooted in combating mis and disinformation. We know that there's a small number of bad actors that are spreading this mis and disinformation, but there's many more people that are trusted messengers that we know that when people receive information about elections and votings, it's usually from a family member, a friend, a neighbor, someone that they trust. So building up these trusted messengers is a key element in the Democracy Truth Project, where folks can have these conversations, offer trainings and guidance. We also have, as part of the project, um, an AI large language modeling program where we're tracking bad actors online in states and in states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, Georgia, and and following those bad actors online to get a sense of what the information they're putting out there, in order to counter with um, guidance on putting factual information out there, not getting into a spat of back and forth with these bad actors, because knowing that that could fall down a rabbit hole easily, but putting together message guidance that could share truthful information about voting. We also at the league have Vote 411, which is uh a voter guide that we use for folks to get the most accurate election information, to get sample ballots, to understand that candidates are going to be sharing their platforms via Vote 411. So we use that as a resource too. But all in all, the Democracy Truth Project is rooted in training and in getting folks the training that they need to be able to empower their communities to understand that mis and disinformation is not going away, but we should be better equipped to understand how to deal with it, when knowing how to inoculate properly, knowing how to be trusted messengers in our community, and knowing how to debunk and pre-bunk as mis and disinformation impacts communities in real time.
I love that. I love the pre-bunk that that there's literally um hopefully a vaccine, if you will, for being able to discernment, right? Democracy requires discernment as a core process. You know, Bruce, you're a technologist, and I'm curious to hear from your perspective um, how how your understanding of technology butts up against sort of this very real challenge of a very small group of people are producing most of the world's information that has been vetted, let's say, as journalism or real news. Uh, Given that you brought this up as a, as the particular threat in this context, what are your thoughts about how those things are working together?
Well, and it's better than it was before when it was just three networks and what they said was news and no one else had any voice. So we do have more voices. I mean, in a sense, misinformation is the end effect of everyone getting a voice. And now there's no curation. I think Mutali had 100% right when you started talking about the corporations. This is really about power. Who has the power to, in AI, create the models? A lot of what I do is try to think about what AI would look like if it wasn't made by a bunch of white tech billionaires in Silicon Valley. And that power concentration is extraordinarily damaging. I blame less the technology and more the economic system in which the technology lies. I mean, there's no reason why an AI has to look at regional English as somehow threatening. That's just a business decision that's been made. And another decision can be made. And if a democracy creates an AI, it would be different. I think the power lens is really critical here. And then in some ways, that's Mutala's, I think, her best work, is really looking at that power and how that affects different communities.
I really appreciate that. And we're going to come back to you, Matali, in a moment with to keep building on the conversation. But I'm going to turn to the team now who's, um, you know, personing, championing, I don't know what we say now, working the Q&A to come on and tell us, give us pick one of the questions, Shannon, and share and tell us, you know, maybe perhaps you all can decide who wants to answer the question. We seem to be losing Chelsea periodically because technology is great until it's not. Um, but hopefully we'll get her back soon. So Shannon, give us a question.
Yeah, so we have a question here that says, sometimes I get the sense that election-related misinformation and disinformation is particularly effective in affecting populations who don't speak English as a first language, because it seems as if no one is fact-checking on these other than English messages in the same ways that systems and people are vetting English messages. I'm wondering if any of the speakers could share this perspective.
Anyone feel able to lean into those questions or curiosities, thoughts?
I don't have any hard answers, but I know that Bruce would definitely agree with me in that most models are created in standard English. That's where the research is. If you look at grant funding for universities, what the NSF, for example, is giving out way more grant funding to teams that are looking at English speaking data sets than they're not. And then to Bruce's point, companies are looking at what's profitable. And if they have been able to get, I'm thinking about Alphabet has a 19% annualized return for the last 30 years. That's trillions of dollars. If they've been able to make those trillions of dollars really championing English and centering English, it's really difficult to make the business decision to say, let's build non-English data sets and then let's now staff the people to look at those, and let's now the annotation I spoke about, these are all teams of people, and it would require different skills. So I don't have hard data, but I can anecdotally say that the investment isn't there.
Thank you. Anyone else have a response they want to add? No? Okay. So let us keep going. Where we so we're delighted that today um that we have the League of Women Voters represented, and we want to make sure that people take advantage of the resources of the League of Women Voters. So we're going to make sure to link to them in a follow-up email for everyone here. We also want to highlight that the programs and resources from our co-sponsor, Generation Vote, which is a youth-led movement and organization focused on defending and expanding the right to vote for young people. And I have to say, I am a huge fan of A, young people, and then B, any group that trusts and believes in the power of young people right now, not in some distant, you can be the president later on, but right now, the power that young people have to shape our democracy. I mean, I know that the work around key civil rights issues um, in a in this current election, and certainly the previous midterm election, was really driven by the power of young people. And so I am curious to know if we have any of our uh, friends here from Generation Vote. I think I see their president and CEO, Brianna. So we're excited to have you here. But I hope that there are more. And we just want to give a little shout out to you all because we do appreciate you deeply, as well as the League for of Women Voters. But let's now turn to bias, surveillance, and concentrating power with AI. And so that obviously means we're going to pivot to Matali. So as we think about bias, surveillance, and concentrating power with AI, and how AI democracy and civil rights may collide, we've been focused on misinformation, and now I want us to look at AI more broadly and how it's intersecting with our civil and political rights, which are so central to maintaining a functioning and healthy democracy. So, Matali, I'm curious to know from your perspective, what are some of the most critical areas where we need to be vigilant about AI and our civil rights? You alluded to some, but we want to lean into not just the algorithmic bias, as you stated, but even possibly surveillance and other, um, you know, impacts. And so I open that question to you.
Sure. I'm going to go backwards. I will come back to surveillance, but the thing that I know that we've been looking at AI for the people over the last year are the ways that the opening of data centers are impacting not just our environment, but Black communities generally. So the way that we are developing AI systems, generative AI systems, means that they need way more power, way more electricity. And we were out at the University of Kansas earlier this year, and we were looking at the swaths of land that were being taken for these systems to basically cool the pipes, as it were. I'm trying to put it in layman's terms, to make sure that we can then generate these new technologies. And what was happening was coal mines were being taken back online, water. So if we think about Flint, Michigan, and Black communities and lack of water, water was being taken offline by private companies. Google has $1 billion cooling center out in Kansas. And the Black people in those communities were finding that the physical resources that they had, streets, parking, housing, were being taken away to really gear up and provide the infrastructure for this new AI economy. And that was a way that we are beginning to see things like job losses that are going to be happening in historically communities that don't have the power to fight back. Physical resources, water, electricity, et cetera, et cetera. So even though we were AI for the people, we were now beginning to think about, what does this mean for the economic justice movement? What does this mean from democratic demands that we're making of government around climate? What does this mean when we have a hurricane and the first thing that happens is that FEMA isn't giving more money, when what we're actually doing is that we're undermining the climate that we have to create more situations like that in communities that are more likely to be poor and Black. So for those who are old enough, I know you young folks, voting people may not be. I'm the mother of a Gen Zer who has just turned 18, just in time to vote. We had you turned 18 just in time to vote party. We were very excited. But I know that my Gen Z children think about not just voting on the day, but all the other ways that environment and all of these other things work together. So that's kind of one new concern, which isn't about the technology or the algorithm, but it's connected to that larger ecosystem about how we bring these technologies online. And then to Bruce's point, who's benefiting? It's a really small group of billionaires in Northern California. But we're taking from everybody else. In terms of surveillance, the other thing that we've looked at AI for the people since the fall of Roe are period trackers and the different ways that health technologies could potentially be used to figure out who is seeking reproductive care and who is not, and then potentially criminalizing those people. And what's been really interesting as we've kind of followed that research, Paul, is that it's the same thing. It is the poor people, it is the Black people, it is also people that are looking for gender affirming care, because if you're tracking health, you're tracking all health. Again, the poor people, the Black people. And one of the things that we've been really worried about as these technologies are asking you to put your health data into your wrist. By the way, it's nobody's business how many steps you walked. We really don't care. You are building a multi-billion-dollar business for everybody else. Just walk. Just walk. Or BlackRock. Who cares about who your ancestors are? That's nonsense. Read Alondra Nelson's book. They are making some weirdo determination out of nothing. I live in Brooklyn, in the Republic of Brooklyn too, but my ancestry is Bemba. So that means in 100 years, when somebody says, tries to find me, if they use those stupid DNA things, they're going to be like, you have a Bemba relative. Yes, that's what my DNA says, but my house is in Brooklyn. I live in Brooklyn. I live in America. Stop lying to people. So, but the point that I'm making there is that BlackRock bought 23andMe. BlackRock is a hedge fund. BlackRock may then, because it's good business, sell that data to security sources. And that's what happens with your Ring doorbell. I mean, really, I want to give other people to speak, but Bruce knows that I've been speaking about this for close to 15 years. I have all the receipts and it's all bad. So the thing that I'll say, the thing that I'll say around surveillance is we're so quick to be like facial recognition and police, and we're not thinking about I don't want to call out the name of a company, but we're not thinking about health trackers. We're not thinking about period trackers. We're not thinking about data centers, which in themselves are not the technology, but if it's taking physical resources out of, if it's taking housing out of your community, as a sociologist, I'm thinking about inequality. Who is that going to impact? And I think that one of the things that I love about this trusted messenger model that the League of Women Voters have, and they have a very tight scope, you know, it's really about voting and democracy, but we do need to have much more of these community conversations. And I think the amazing work that I've seen Bruce do over the years, which is kind of decentralizing who gets to be a technologist and who gets to have the power, is to have more of these community conversations about, you know, getting ChatGTP to write your email isn't only taking you away from the skill of writing. As I said, I have Gen Xers who want to turn in essays as if they are texts. And so I am doing basic writing as part of my parenting plan, but it's also the data center that is taking the physical resources out and housing out. It's also having this cultural idea that we should be trying to find our long lost distant relatives and the science isn't really there. It's tracking of the steps. It's as well as the Ring doorbell, where if you want to know who's at your door, just go to the door. You don't need to surveil your neighbors, because that data, that video is then being passed on to the police. And you know, one thing that's really sad about you and I, Marley, is that we're living in a city with no leadership. Our mayor and everybody else has been indicted. So we don't even know who the NYPD are or who they're giving that information to. It could be any old oligarch. We don't know. We're just out here. And so like I said, I could go on for years. It's a bad scene.
I mean, you definitely have me rethinking a lot of things, and patting myself on the back for never giving up my DNA, um, except I guess when I go to the doctor. And as you
Which is
rightly
covered by HIPAA.
HIPAA, right?
Which is why I am so big on regulation. We do have limited privacy. We just need it to be a norm within
Right.
our legal framework.
Right. And I guess what we understand is that a lot of our legal frameworks have not caught up to the technology that we have available and the responsible use of that technology. Um, you know, tracks along with the, again, the speed, the sophistication, the scope, the scale of these technologies. You know, I really appreciated what you shared about this. Um, I stopped using this word about 5 years ago, but I'll bring it back for a moment. The intersectionality of issues, right? Intersectionality, I've got all kinds of issues with how that word has been abused. Um, but recognizing that its power is exactly in naming how power operates and functions at the intersection of whatever it is that we are grappling with. And so, this business of looking at the power of technology, generative AI, and these kinds of things. And yes, we're here in the city, you know, tech bros are kind of running it, and we should have concerns about large hedge funds and private equity companies running public goods and being responsible for keeping citizens um, well and protected as they try to, you know, make a profit. I mean, that's a legitimate question to ask. How are you going to do that, and at what cost and what price? And so I'm really appreciating sort of the lifting up. I don't believe that you have a Gen Z child, but I'm just gonna say, like, wow. I was like, wow. Um, and really sort of asking really to turn at this point, as we remind you all to submit questions that folks can focus on. When it comes to AI, we still have an opportunity to harness this technology for the good of democracy, right? And I'm curious and want to really truly hear from each of you how you think, right? What is the hope, right? What is the hope for AI that, what is your hope for what AI could be used for in our democracy, right? So I want to kind of pivot to that question. I'm going to start with Bruce, tee up Chelsea, and close with you, Natalie, on that. And then we're going to, move to our final question before we move to opening discussion, Q&A. So what is your hope for what AI could do for democracy, Bruce?
So I'm actually optimistic about AI and democracy. I'm writing a book on AI and democracy. I guess you can't see it because Zoom blocks it out. Damn you, Zoom. There it is, currently in draft. And to me, I want AI to democratize power. I see AI helping people run for office, especially at the local level where there's no actual human support. I think that AI can help people interact with government to receive government services, interact with bureaucracy, helping people with legal representation. I mean, these are all things that if you're rich, you get. You get this assistance. You don't if you're not. I want to use AI to help reporters figure out what government is doing, do the kind of investigative, data-driven journalism that we've lost the business model for. And lastly, help people understand political issues and help them get involved and coordinate and be active. And, I mean, Mutali's 100% right. This is all, is it corporate or is it not corporate? If it is corporate AI, you tend to not get these things. Science fiction writer Ted Chiang said once that people's fears of AI are actually misplaced fears of capitalism. I think that's really wise. That it's not the tech, it's the people that control the tech. It's the money behind the tech. It's the power behind the tech. My hope for AI is that it democratizes power, thereby helping us be more democratic. My fear for AI is it does the opposite.
Thank you, Bruce. I love that, right? Democratizing power. What are you leaning into in your response, Chelsea, to this question?
I similarly, in the same sense as Bruce, hope that AI can be leveraged for a more inclusive democracy. I hope that AI could offer access to diminishing the digital divide and offering more educational tools and resources for folks to get um, familiarized with AI. I hope for a renewed sense of civic engagement and for a bridge between the partisan divide, that AI could equalize. I think that a lot of where we're coming from is rooted in fear of the unknown and technology, but I hope that we can harness those benefits of technology for the public good, and offer more transparency when it comes to our democracy. I think that we're in dire need of rebuilding civic trust. So I hope that AI can revitalize and strengthen our democracy, in a way that offers accessibility for folks to understand it more, and to, I hope there's like an educational awakening when it comes to AI, and how to address it. Because I think there's many benefits of AI, but I think from where we stand now, there's a lot of unknown, and that breeds fear. So in the democracy space and in the space of voting rights, I hope that AI can offer more efficiency and more reliability and more security when it comes to our electoral process and an educational understanding of AI.
Appreciate that. This this business of transparency, right? And, you know, the real fear is not based out of ether. Again, all of this happens in a context. And so we're always grappling with it in that way. What about you, Matali? What is your hope for what AI can do for democracy?
Well, I run AI for the people. So we love technology. We think that it can be a public good and it should be a public good. And I think what I'm really hopeful about and what we're already seeing is the way that what AI systems do really well is that they can sort things and they can show you where things are in relationship to each other. And I think speaking as a sociologist, we're really interested in looking at the gaps in society. And I think using AI in research contexts where the goal of the research project is to find why inequality exists can be a really powerful tool for us to solve that. So to Bruce's point, whether it's data-driven journalism that gets us to see that all the stops that are being made, and this is true of Ferguson, and it was a group of data journalists that found when Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson, it was part of this larger municipal system where they were stopping Black people. The police were stopping Black people more, finding them more. And that was the first inkling to show that there was a racial discrimination within the Ferguson police force. But that wouldn't have been possible if they did not have a data set and did not have a way to sort that data set. They didn't use AI, but we can do more of that stuff. I'm also really interested in the way that AI systems can point out our structural inequalities. So really famous 2008 paper by Joy Buolamwini showed that facial recognition didn't recognize Black skin. That paper was then picked up by a sociologist at Harvard called Elias Monk, who had done some data that showed that dark-skinned people were more likely to be killed than police than light-skinned Black people. And he created a list. He created basically a range of skin tone and was using that in his analysis to show how color, it wasn't just race, but that your hue change your life chances. Google then took up that now extended palette and said, well, if what Joy's paper is saying is that dark skin can't be recognized, what happens if we develop a more sophisticated view of skin and skin tone? And they developed the Monk scale. That Monk scale was then integrated into the Pixel 6 camera, which was kicked off at the Super Bowl 2021 by Lizzo. I'm a huge pop culture person, so you will always hear those references. And it became the fastest selling camera that Google had. Who bought it? White men. The reason white men bought the camera was that it was just a better camera. Not only did it recognize skin tone better, every aspect of that camera was now sharper. And for those people who are using their phones, not just as communication systems, but are also using them as visual tools, it became this much better tool. AI did that. Research into AI, you have one paper in computer science that shows the deficit. You have another paper in sociology that shows that how you can fix that deficit. You take it to the Bruces of this world, the technologists, and you say, the problem is we don't have the palette. Let's develop that. That is the type of, I think when Bruce speaks about these other technical communities that exist outside of corporate, that's what we're talking about. And honestly, the types of tools that we would use to even get to those outcomes are only going to be through using these super fast processing speeds of AI, these ability to sort, these data sets that human beings can't think about. That's what we think about with AI for the people. Now, what we also say is that we need to find sustainable ways for that happening. So again, going back to the data centers, this enhanced ability to compute and to understand the social world through technology shouldn't come at the risk of our environment. There needs to be, some values deciding about where we're going to put our resources. But when I talk about AI for the people, I am talking about making it easier to run for office, making it easier to get public services, finding gaps and fixing those gaps and going toward developing an economic and social system where we work with the machine, with the idea of improving humanity, instead of where the machine drives us, so that a few people can get an annualized return of 31% per annum. That's a capitalism question, as Bruce said, and I would even go further and invoke Cedric Robinson and say that that's a racial capitalist problem, because it really is on the backs of Black and brown folk.
Mm. I appreciate all of your comments, each of you, and Mutali for giving us a very quick lesson in targeted universalism with the pixel camera. So hopefully folks out there were paying attention to that. And so what I want to do is a very brief closing of this panel as we open to our viewers with us. And for the team, I'm going to change it up here a little bit. My question to each of you, right, is then what you shared was your hope for AI, right, and what it can do, for democracy, right? Um, what is your, in a minute or less, how do we get there? How do we get there to that vision, that hopeful vision that each of you just shared? Well, one, two things, three things that can do to get vision.
I can go quickly. You develop a business case for doing good, and policy advocacy happens within companies as well as at the government level. That example I just shared with the Pixel 6 phone ended with the fact that it was the biggest seller. There is a business case for responsible and ethical AI.
So I want to say the opposite of that, which is also we need non-corporate AI. All AI cannot be for profit. So I push something called public AI, which we are seeing. Singapore's doing it. France is doing it. AI that is not built with a corporate profit model in mind. There'll be a different sort of AI, more egalitarian, more equitable, more fair. And that's a counterpoint to what Mutali is saying. We need both.
And you, Chelsea, your final word?
I would say that I would love to see the push for the FEC to regulate more when it comes to breaking down the influx of disinformation in elections, and an increase in voter participation, to reduce the mis and disinformation, but building that transparency to break down barriers to participation. So helping promote the transparency factor to help voters understand more about AI, and to get a better sense of how it's working, and how a healthy democracy depends on that transparency, for to get that access to truthful and complete voter information.
Thank you. Yes. Transparency. Whew. Okay. Well, as I take this moment to pause and thank Bruce and Mutali and Chelsea for subjecting themselves to our questions, but more importantly, for offering us incredible insight and wisdom around what feels like a very scary topic in, quite frankly, what feels like a very scary time. And I want to pivot now in our conversation. So please, Bruce, Chelsea, and Mutali, don't go anywhere, because we are now going to begin to lean into our sponsor questions. So sponsor question, folks, hang in there. I hope that everyone has had a chance to enjoy this conversation. It's not over. We have about 13 minutes left to ask some questions from the audience, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. So the first question that we have comes from the local policy lab, and so Shannon, take us away.
Great. So from our friends at the local policy lab, they are asking, do our panelists have suggestions for how local governments can respond to some of the challenges and concerns addressed here today? Are there policies that could be enacted at the local level that would help minimize the risk of mis and disinformation to local communities?
I'm thinking on the municipal level. I think the use of public libraries as places that people can get information around voting, that they can get stuff debunked. There was a really good example during COVID in the ways in which Singapore used humor to debunk mis and disinformation around COVID. And one of the big disinformation narratives that got out there was that the masks would give you cancer. And so they had this huge campaign where it was people, all the other things the masks could. So like the masks could also smoke weed. The mask could also do this, the mask, and they just really poked attention to the fact that it was always more than a mask. I think what local governments can do can think about using public spaces, parks, libraries. They can use bus shelters. They can use other ways of doing some of this either pre-bunking work or debunking work in ways that are fun, in ways that kind of lighten you. I really enjoyed calling disinformation agents weird this election season. It didn't feel scary. It didn't feel like my heart was going to break. It was just, they really were just weirdos. I think at the local level where people know each other, you can really do some of that great kind of conversation, that great communication work.
Anyone else want to take go at this question? We do have some more.
I would say that local governments reaching out and being intentional about public awareness campaigns when it comes to mis and disinformation, similar to what Matali said about making them fun and energizing, but making them open and acceptable to folks getting to know their local election officials, spending time understanding the electoral process. Of course, shameless plug for folks being volunteering as poll workers or election observers to play a more active role when it comes to election work. But doing opening up the pathways for folks to get more involved civically and understanding that they have a role to play when it comes to local election officials and understanding the work that they do.
I love that. And of course, for those of you who are not so familiar with Everyday Democracy's work, we are really rooted and grounded in the principle that everyday people, ordinary people, power our democracy through their engagement in civic processes. And quite honestly, we can't deliver on the promise of democracy without practicing it. So that's always, you gotta, back in the day, we used to say, you gotta be in it to win it. And so there's always that invitation. Shannon, I'm gonna come to you again and ask for the next question.
Yeah. One question I'm paraphrasing from another one of our event sponsors is, when using AI to help generate content, what are some tips on prompt engineering and ways that we can use AI in a way that isn't harmful, that is beneficial? Are there tips that the panelists have on that?
One of the things that's happening in industry is that you have to be really, really prescriptive about what you want to get out, what you want from the prompt, because unfortunately the models that we're using are not streamlined enough or sophisticated enough to not go into what they call, I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm blacking out. I really should have more English, but they're just not sophisticated enough to not go down rabbit holes. And so you have to be, really careful about that. And so I wouldn't necessarily generate content. It could be maybe a good way to brainstorm and start something, but they're really not at the level of sophistication where they could generate a whole thing without you getting like a black Nazi like Google did like a month ago.
So when you say rabbit hole, you mean the racism
Oh,
stuff?
I'm sorry, hallucination. It just starts saying gibberish. It starts making up stuff.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
like,
Okay.
making up
Nonsensical.
stuff and, making you look foolish when you actually have a brain you could be using.
Hmm. And I mean, I think that most technology people I know would say, and certainly data people would say, garbage in, garbage out. So there's always that challenge. Anyone else, or shall we move to a next question? We have about 2 minutes left before we start closing up. Shannon, you want to take us to another
All right,
question?
I'm moving to the next question. Are there books that you would recommend us reading? I think everybody here has brought up some valid points, both, hopeful and some not so hopeful, but any books you think we should be reading about AI?
Books are hard because this field is moving so fast. And I'm trying to write a book and I'm constantly rewriting sections because things are happening. So I think you better go to the papers, the commentators, the analyses, the stuff on the web than books. I can't think of a book. I mean, they're good books, but they're not current.
Yeah, I have to agree. I would read Bruce. I did before I met Bruce. I really enjoyed it. I'm very excited about this new book. But even I'm reading another colleague of Bruce and I's, Jesse Daniels. I'm rereading Cyber Racism for a
Oh,
paper,
Jesse, I know her.
but it was published in 2009. And so, it's like a million, like the themes are still relevant, but it's 2009 and it's talking about websites and it's talking about MySpace. So that's, that's our field, unfortunately.
So
But I
I
can
wonder, I'm
email
sorry.
suggestions. I can email.
Yes, great. And I'm wondering if any websites or people blog, I don't know, what are they, Substacks? I don't know what they call them now. Folks that you would recommend people follow. We certainly should follow Bruce and Vitali and Chelsea for sure, and follow Everyday Democracy, as we love to bring you these kinds of events to stay on top of these things. Huge fan and friend of Alondra Nelson, Dr. Alondra Nelson as well. So really appreciating her work in this space, and certainly Dr. Ruha Benjamin talking about technology in the space as well. So I'm just throwing those folks out in the mix as well. I think we have time for one question. I think yeah, go ahead, Shannon.
Right. We touched on this a little bit about the concentration of AI being controlled by large tech companies. What are some ways that we can prevent this concentration of power into the hands of a few and ensure that AI development benefits society at large?
And that question comes from one of our event sponsors, Generation Vote. So just want to shout them out too.
I'm a big fan of antitrust. I'm a big fan of public funding, of academic funding. I mean, we know how to mute the power of big corporations. We choose not to in the United States, but there's nothing new about AI that doesn't make our existing tools against corporate power magically not work anymore. We need to use them. So 3 cheers for Lena Khan at the Federal Trade Commission, and let's hope for more.
Yes. Yes. Great. Anyone else want to lean into that?
I would definitely +1, because to Bruce's point, AI has been in development for 60 years, but most of that time it was in government hands. It was DARPA that were doing it. DARPA was a big one. One of the reasons that we don't have as many problems with government developed technologies is that they have to align with our laws. And one of the things that many of these systems don't do, to the point of Lena Khan, one of the things that many of these systems don't do is that they don't align with our laws. And so when you have a when you have a technology that has been developed in the public realm, you also get the underlying values of that society being encoded into not just the design, but the governance structure and the deployment, versus when you get some random person making something in their garage because they want to become a trillionaire or they want to live in space. Just let them live in space. We don't want them here anyway. Go to Mars and leave us alone.
Oh my. On that note, I just want to thank you all again so much. Thank you to our panelists, to our co-sponsors, the local policy lab and Generation Vote, our staff and team who made this possible, and our attendees. We know that we're having a conversation alone if you're not here too. This has been a fantastic conversation. This conversation, though, is the first of many in our Doing Democracy virtual events that Everyday Democracy is will be holding. Our next event, which we hope you'll join us on December 5th, same time, is focused on building democracy beyond elections. And we're delighted to have Demos and Generation Vote and Showing Up for Racial Justice and the Center for Popular Democracy here to talk with us about all of the organizing and work that folks did on the ground to get us into and through our election season. We want to extend the impact of this conversation, so we'll be sending out an email with resources from the panelists, our co-sponsors, and linking a recording to the main panel, which we hope you'll utilize and share widely. We thank you so very, very much, and we wish you all an incredible evening and a safe and, hopefully election season as we are closing in on the biggest nail biter I've ever been involved in. Thank you so much again, and we wish you all.
Well, thank you.
I know